So first of all, welcome everyone to the It's Your Move Career Possibilities for STEM Students event. We are really excited to have you here today. And so this event, for most of you guys know this, but it's hosted by Dimension Sciences and AIOG in partnership with the Million Women's Mentors Connecticut chapter. And so before I pass it off to Max, who's our keynote speaker for tonight, I'm just going to briefly introduce you all to Dimension Sciences, and Britt will introduce you, or Rob will introduce you to AIOG. So DS is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to address the inclusion of minorities in science by fostering higher education and innovative research through financial support and mentoring. And so in order for us to provide these scholarship programs and run our events like this one tonight, we rely on small donations. So tonight, if anyone feels inclined to support DS in future events like this one, we are having a raffle where if you make a $5 donation, you will be entered into a drawing to win a one-year subscription to Masterclass. And so for those of you who don't know what Masterclass is, it's essentially Netflix for online learning. So it's a bunch of different celebrities doing cooking things or science, math, a bunch of different sorts of things. It's pretty cool. And so to do that, you can scan the QR code with your phone to make that donation if you feel inclined to do so. And so this event is part of our DS Campus program. And so I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Brittany Knight, who's going to tell you a little bit more about how to become a part of the program. Go ahead, Britt.
Yes. Sorry, I didn't flip to the slide. I have a master's class, one-year subscription, and it's wonderful. I got to learn a bit about I like composers and things for soundtracks. And so you actually get to learn from the experts, which is really neat. Tony Hawk, for instance, also for skateboarding. This is just someone else. Okay. So DS Campus is an internship program that Dimension Sciences started this year. We're in our first cohort of students right now. And so this is an internship program to get individuals that are in STEM or interested in pursuing a STEM career in STEM and medicine to get a little experience in nonprofit organizations, as well as learn about different topics. For instance, this semester, we've been doing a special project where we're creating online content that spotlights Black female scientists that have been contributing to COVID-19 research and medicine. And so this is a rolling admission basis. We're looking for individuals for the fall. So if you're interested, there is a, on our website, there is and in the channel on Slack, the link to basically register to become an intern. And then there's a interview process. And so yeah, reach out if you have any questions. There is a Q&A section on the website, the DSAX website that is associated with Dimension Sciences, with more information about that. And without further ado, moving on. Oh, Kirby?
Oh, yes. And so one of the programs that is going to be, or awards that are part of the DS Campus is a Scientista Award. It is an award to a postdoc who is a Brazilian woman scientist doing research in the US. And the prize is a $2,000 cash prize. So if you know anyone who is a Brazilian woman scientist doing research in the US, please share this with them. The deadline, I believe, is March 19th. It says it right there on the screen. Yep. So you have until March 19th to apply. And it's for postdocs and finishing up PhD students.
Hey, everybody. I'm Rob Piersky. I'm the founder of the Academia Industry Opportunities. I first want to thank everyone for attending today. I'm really happy to have been able to partner with Dimension Sciences and DS Campus to host this event. Many of you have gone to our previous events where we've hosted networking events in person, but we're so happy to bring this online and all of you to learn about the many career opportunities you all have as STEM students and professionals. Our mission is to basically provide opportunities for upper level undergraduates, graduates, and postdoctoral fellows to communicate with scientific professionals in both academic and non-academic careers. And we provide information regarding these various careers in biological sciences, as well as engineering, mathematics, chemistry, physics, etc. and to help students and postdocs identify and develop the skills that are needed to transition from the academic environment to industry. We have a word cloud up at the top right of just a few of the careers that we've hosted thus far. I'd also like to take this time to thank the team of students and postdocs that I have working with me. I, of course, have Britt Knight, who's been part of DS Campus now, as well as AIOG for the past couple of years. I have Yujay Lee, a graduate student at UConn Health. Dominique Martin and Rachel Gilmore are both second-year students at UConn Health, and we have our first ambassador for AIOG, Natalie, who's at Boston College. Anyone who's interested in becoming a college ambassador, basically helping to get events hosted at other universities, of course, using AIOG as their backing, but we're always looking for people to get involved. Reach out to us. Our email is found at the bottom there. Follow us at Beyond the PhD on Twitter and Facebook. Our website's at the bottom as well, and all of this information can be found on Slack. And with that, I'll turn it back to Kirby.
Thanks, Rob. All right, so without further ado, and he's going to introduce himself and talk about his story for the next about 25, 30 minutes. And there'll be a short Q&A session too. So if you guys have questions for Max, you can either type them in the chat, or you guys can raise your hand and ask him directly. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to, hopefully I do not butcher your name, Max Jordan Nagumani Tiako.
Thanks, Kirby. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I am delighted to be here with Dimension Sciences. So briefly, where I'm at right now. So I am a medical student in Connecticut, in New Haven. I go to Yale. I'm in my final year. I've been here since 2016. I am originally from Cameroon, and I went to Howard University for undergrad. And I guess what I want to leave you, those of you who are sort of, going through the pipeline of making your way in higher education in the STEM, is that success in academia or in general isn't linear. And so a little bit of my story. So like I said, I grew up in Cameroon. I moved here in 2009 to go to college. I went to Howard, mostly not having known much about the college admission process here in the United States, but my uncle, who's my dad's older brother, has lived in the DC area for since like the 1980s, and he went to Howard for graduate school, and his wife is from the DC area, and she went to Howard for law school. So they thought, Howard is a great place, especially, at least in their, reasoning process was, I am a young Black 16-year-old coming into the United States. Howard would be a good place for me to sort of find my footing and anchor myself in how to, navigate life in America, and then, see where I would go from there. And I initially matriculated as a math major, and then I very quickly switched to civil and environmental engineering. I just always felt like I didn't know what the application of math was, or at least I didn't have good enough guidance at the time. And I loved civil engineering, at least theoretically. Designing bridges was really cool. And interestingly enough, my first summer internship, I was doing wastewater treatment work, because civil engineering, you get to do, there's wastewater, stormwater, air pollution. It's really, the environment that we live, the built environment. I realized I don't like wastewater treatment. And then the following summer, I worked on a construction site, and I thought that might be perhaps a better fit, because I like structures, right, designing things. And I was an intern on the Blue Plains Tunnel project in Washington, D.C. So it was a project that's part of the Clean Rivers Act. So the Clean Rivers Act, which is this big legislation that's meant to protect our rivers, quite literally. And there was this huge issue in DC where a lot of the wastewater, the surplus of wastewater processed through DC Water was being dumped into the Potomac River. And for anyone who isn't familiar, DC Water is the largest wastewater treatment plant in the world. So the Potomac was being super polluted, and DC Water and collaborators were building a new tunnel, the Blue Plains Tunnel project, to reroute the waste. And I realized I also hated construction. I think I can't even tell whether I hated construction or whether I rather just hated my internship, but they put me in charge of communication, which kind of ruined the enchantment that I felt for civil engineering. You know, I never thought that my role in an internship on a construction project would be like sort of being the communication switchboard. And little did I know that was a very important role. My senior year, ABET, which is the accreditation body for engineering and technology programs, decided, well, not required that we begin to take a biological class before graduation. So I took biology that first semester, and I realized, oh man, I really do miss the biological sciences. And I started thinking, well, what am I going to do? I don't like any of the civil engineering stuff in practice. Theoretically, it's fun, but I know I like biology and human physiology. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go ahead and find a way to go to graduate school and apply all these civil engineering skills, but to biomedical things. It made sense at the time, right? Civil engineering is the oldest engineering discipline. Any engineering discipline that it deals with materials or fluids, like the fluid mechanics, the mechanics of materials, material science, a lot of that science was developed by civil engineers, way back when. So I thought there was a way there for me, and that's how I ended up applying to graduate school. I went to Georgia Tech. So initially I thought, oh, I'm gonna do a master's first, but my PI said, well, I've got funding. If you wanna enroll as a PhD student, then we could get you started on the project. And I said, sure, why not? But I didn't quite know what I wanted. I started wondering, oh, do I want to go to medical school too? Do I want to be an MD PhD? And my PI in grad school himself was MD PhD, so he thought, if you want to do MD PhD, I'll support those dreams, and we'll cross that juncture when we get there. And I will tell you, graduate school was really hard. Having gone to Howard, where everybody was Black, I mean, not everyone, but just about everyone, was Black, and then being at Georgia Tech, where a much less collegial environment. I don't think I necessarily always had the sort of language or even the awareness to put my finger on what was going on around me in terms of, feeling like I was being excluded from some learning opportunities or even collaborative opportunities. Like I remember the hardest class I took in graduate school was continuum mechanics. It's a super hard class. There are people from a bunch of different departments who took the course. And by the end of the semester, our professor gave us a take-home final, and he said, you guys could go ahead and work in groups as long as you don't show each other your final answer, something along those lines. And I remember that my cohort, many of us were taking that class, and I would ask, oh, do you want to get together and work on the final? They'd say, oh, I'm working on the final for the other class. And then eventually I was like, dude, I don't really mean to pester you, but I really think would benefit from working, together on this. And so this classmate of mine said, okay, fine, come, I'm at insert location. And I get there are like 5 other classmates who are also working on this final, and not the other, not the final that was initially mentioned to me. And that sort of crystallized what I had been feeling like. I was like, am I a conspiracist here? But that, there was quite some exclusion, and with experiencing, racism or other forms of discrimination generally in the workplace or at school, it's always hard to attribute it to racism, right? It's like you can't quite tell. Like I'm someone who likes to be able to actually prove something. I don't have a counterfactual. Like I can't. It's hard to say, well, you're excluding me because I'm Black, but it just so happened that you're excluding me and like not everybody else. So that happened over and over, with different classes where I'm like trying to find a study group, and and ultimately end up being, sort of almost surviving on my own. By my second year of grad school, I was kind of miserable doing bench work, and my PI knew I wanted to go to med school eventually. There was something about bench work that was like unfulfilling. I felt like I want to be able to say, oh, this work that I'm doing, like it's going to be applicable I don't know, in 5-10 years, I'm going to see the like, I'm going to see humankind benefit from it, as opposed to, I don't know, generating knowledge for 50 years down the line. At least that's how I felt. And it was also just lonely. Some, like, you work in a lab, you're not interacting with people a lot, unless your lab mates are also in the lab pipetting and what else. So my advisor, sort of sat me down and said, well, if you're not happy, like, and you think you want to go to medical school, I'm happy to support you doing that instead of, like, continuing on this project. And also at the time, my lab was applying for a grant that was going to fund whichever project I was doing my PhD on, and they didn't get the grant. And so it was like a juncture point where I was like, you know what, fine, I'm going to go to medical school. I mean, you don't just say that, right? That meant I had to start studying for the MCAT. And I did. I took the MCAT December 6th in 2014. That was not the last, but the penultimate MCAT before they changed towards a new MCAT. And so I was sort of rushing my way through, right? Because I was like, there's no way I want to take that new MCAT that has all these new subjects. The new MCAT had psychology, it had biochemistry on it, things that I never took as an engineering major before. So I studied for the MCAT while also working on, like, my master's thesis, and it was fine. I went on to graduate, and was super lucky to find a job at Vanderbilt in the bioengineering lab, where actually, my skills were applicable while I was in the process of applying to medical school. And since med school, I've been here, and I initially, having this bioengineering background, I always thought I would do work that's sort of related to medical devices. But another thing that also drove me to medicine, to actually, going to medical school, as opposed to working in the biomedical engineering and device and innovation space, was, it really felt, especially when I was in the physiology classes, and this is relevant today because yesterday was a 100th anniversary of insulin being discovered, was how much of innovation has been made, right? We've made so much progress in medical innovation over the last century, but, like, the life expectancy gap between Black and white people in this country has barely changed. And I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to be able to contribute to addressing that, as opposed to creating, yet another set of innovation that ultimately may not even be accessible to most people who look like me here in the United States, but also globally. And so in medical school, I sort of, like, dove deep in thinking about research that relates to marginalized communities, people who are stigmatized for various reasons beyond, race. Like, so I do a lot of addiction, medicine related research, people who use drugs or people who inject drugs. Also do research related to perinatal substance use disorders, access to medications, especially for women with opioid use disorder. And the last few things that I've been doing while in medical school include sort of my extracurricular, have been writing quite a bit about racism writ large, and both in terms of my personal experiences in med school, as well as generally the structural aspects of it. I host a podcast. So I host a podcast which is focused also on health disparities. So basically, I invite others. In fact, I'm interviewing someone after this, other scholars who are doing work that is about health disparities, to sort of amplify their work. And I sort of aim to draw from different disciplines. And I think something that has been most fulfilling for me in medical school is realizing that there isn't one cookie cutter equation, but also just generally applicable to the path that I've taken to get to this point where, a lot of medical students, when you come to medical school, you have to take the thing that is going to get you into residency is how well you do on your boards. That's like, right, the cookie cutter approach. And so a lot of people start med school, they study to the boards, they, like memorize first aid starting first year. I didn't really do that. I studied because I said, well, I need to study so I know what I'm talking about for when I see patients down the line. And I didn't necessarily bother too much to memorize the nitty gritty detail of biochemistry at the time. but I've found other things that were fulfilling for me. And ultimately, I think I think those things have paid off. And it hasn't been linear, right? Like there have been ups and downs in med school, and like in grad school and in college, like along the way. But I think ultimately, I'm like very thrilled about sort of how far I've come, and hopefully where I'm going. And yeah, that's really the lesson for me, is to just remember, if there are barriers that you're facing, some certain struggles, recalibrating, changing route, taking a different approach, it's absolutely okay. And mentorship and good guidance from other people who have been there along the way is also super crucial in sort of helping you sort of find that that guiding light. I'm going to stop here just so you all have an opportunity to ask me any question, so that we don't go over time.
Does anyone have any questions for Max, either about his career path, trajectory, graduate school, anything? Anything about, he said comments?
Well, I have a one to start. Thank you for sharing your story, Max. That's amazing. And I think it's so beautiful that you just like, you got a training in such a different field and then pivoted based on what you just knew underlying, that you were like, you're gravitating towards medicine. Can you speak a little bit about, like the feeling or some of the challenges of making that kind of jump of one field to another field for your career?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely always felt like, man, I'm going to be woefully inadequate or unprepared compared to the people, who have been on that path already. So that's how I felt when I went to grad school, right? I'm coming from a civil engineering department, joining this bioengineering program, and I have barely taken biology, right? Like I took 2 biology classes as a senior, but I think a lot of ways I've been able to sort of make up for it was just being hungry for knowledge. And it's the same thing in med school. I, again, studied engineering. I was never pre-med, right? The MCAT was really hard for that reason. And so in med school, it was also just super hard to get through the first few blocks that were very like memorization heavy: biochemistry, genetics, and infectious diseases. Those blocks that require not so much an understanding of physiology, but just memorizing things. And for me, it was always, okay, so what's your end goal? And what are all the resources that are available, that you can lean on? And I took advantage of them at every turn. So like in med school, when I felt like I was struggling, I asked for a tutor and I got a tutor, and the tutor helped me figure out how do you study for med school? Studying 6 weeks of med school is like a semester's worth of information in college. So asking for help and just remaining hungry and sort of like focused on my goal was my safety net as I continue to sort of make these leaps.
That's awesome. All right, we have a few questions in the chat box. Do you want to read them, Max, or do you want?
Yeah, sure. Do you have friends, colleagues in similar situations in life, experience that did not continue on their pursuits or professional paths as a result? Yeah, I have friends. I mean, I don't know whether it's not continue per se, but quite a few of my friends from grad school did finish the PhD and then went on to work in consulting, which, much to the chagrin of a lot of their mentors, because academics want you to go into academia, but they'd go to work for McKinsey or whichever other consulting company. So I've met people who felt unfulfilled by academia generally, but figured they'd finish the PhD and do something else. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's good.
And then the next, how did you end up telling your PI friends and family that you wanted to make a change? Did you experience pushback or both? Also, hi, DC Water, I love it. It wasn't, I think in grad school, generally, it wasn't hard to tell my PI because he knew from when I started, right, that I wanted to maybe do a PhD. Like it was always a consideration. So when I was like, I think I want to do this, he was like, okay, fine, let me help you, let me support you. My family, as long as first of all, my family was not initially super thrilled about this idea of like bioengineering. It's kind of like bioengineering can be a little bit intangible, especially to lay folks who like people understand mechanical engineering, civil engineering, but my family was like, what are you doing? A little bit more excited about med school, but also we're like, dude, you've been in school forever. When is that going to stop? I think perhaps where that feels more relevant right now for me is I recently had like a major switch in like specialty of interest. And I think people took it fine. A lot of people mentor you and really do hope that you're going to go into their specialty. But you have to do what's best for you, right? And sometimes that doesn't align with what your mentor thought might have been best for you. And if they're your mentor and they're supporting you, they'll support what you choose to do as opposed to supporting the path that they thought should have been ideal for you.
That's really, really great advice there. We have one person with their hand raised. AJ, do you want to ask your question?
Yes. Yes. So thank you very much for your talk. It was very informative and really spoke towards how I approached my transitions. And so my question would be, what has been the biggest overall lesson that you've learned with all of these transitions? Because jumping from field to field to field, a lot of the basic skills you have to adapt, but there's usually a core component that you kind of carry from these transitions that aid you throughout these career shifts.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think generally, you're right. There are just fundamental skills that you can continue to, make useful. And so for me, agility, remaining agile, expecting that it's not going to be easy, I would say were some important lessons, right? And again, like really leaning on any support, identifying any potential sources of support that I could, so that I could ask for help. I have no shame when it comes to asking for help. I think sometimes in graduate school, and especially in medical school, there's this element of like performing knowledge, like performing being smart, right? This is something that comes up a lot when we're like on our clinical rotations. You want to look good. You want to, even if you don't know everything, you want to pretend that you at least know something, right? So I think sometimes generally in academia, there is a pressure to perform your smarts or perform your smart, but it's okay to sort of have that humility that requires you to say, I don't know. I'm like drowning here and I need a life vest, right? I think that's my biggest, just general lesson, like knowing when it's time to ring those bells. And in terms of the skills that I think are just like sort of translatable from area to area, it's like, can you appraise information? Can you interpret information? Can you seek further information? So my curiosity, going back to the original text, those things remain sort of fundamental to being able to succeed, be it in engineering, in when I was in graduate school and now in medical school. Like when it's something that I am seeing in the clinical scenario, I don't quite understand like the reasoning behind it. I go back to my pathophysiology text, and it helps make sense of it. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, AJ, for the question. All right. Do we have time for one more question, you think, or should we? Britt, what do you think?
I think we should move to the breakout rooms.
All right.
Sorry, Suchita.
No, thanks.
But Max, do you have some contact information
Yeah, sure.
Would you
I'm
mind
gonna put it
sharing
in
with
the chat.
people? Yes.
I am like in the middle of wrapping medical school up, so it will take me like a while maybe to respond, but here's my email, and then my Twitter is here as well.
Maybe the name of your podcast.
Oh yeah, the podcast is
Sure.
script.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for talking. I'm so glad you could make it today and share your story. And thank you to everyone with your comments. I hope, Max, you read some of the comments in here. Very, very supportive. I like it, guys. But
Thank you
yeah, I
so
think,
much.
yes, wonderful. Well, this is a great beginning to our events, and we'll move to the second phase now. Kirby, if you would like to share.